Hitler's buried secret. The Nazis' ultimate weapon.
It's got very long range.
Built to kill without warning.
You think you're prepared for it, then you get here and it overwhelms you.
World War II was fought on vast landscapes across the planet.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
But the evidence of that war is disappearing fast.
That is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in the water.
That's it.
Congratulations.
Now, technology expert Pete Kelsey
I've got to scan this.
and military historian Marty Morgan
Oh my God, look at this view.
are using 21st century technology to strip away the present and reveal the buried secrets of World War II. This time, why were these buildings targeted by Allied bombers?
My God, this thing is massive.
What dark secrets lurk in these mysterious tunnels?
Wow, look at that.
Can these twisted remains reveal the truth about Hitler's vengeance rocket?
Oh my God, this thing weighs a ton.
March 1945. A V-2 rocket rips through Smithfield Market in London. 110 people are killed. There is no warning, no air raid siren, just shock and carnage. Hitler's V-2 rockets were the world's first ballistic weapons, killers from space. 517 V-2s hit Britain's capital city. Others hit Paris and Antwerp. This devastating weapon went into development in the 1930s. But the Smithfield attack was launched only 7 weeks before Hitler's death. Germany had all but lost the war. Hitler's army was depleted and starved of fuel. The Allies had bombed every weapons installation they could find. So how were the Germans still building and firing the most advanced weapon in the world? Scanning expert Pete Kelsey and military historian Marty Morgan are on a mission to find out.
Is that a bomb crater? God.
They'll be the first in the world to use 3D modeling to reconstruct the history of the V-2, its invention, manufacture, and launch. Their search begins on a remote island off the Baltic coast, near the village of Peenemünde, Germany. Somewhere in this dense forest, the Nazis developed their V-2 rockets. They cloaked this place in absolute secrecy. How can Marty and Pete find out what really went on here?
Can we just open the gate?
Why not?
An old power station is the only significant building still standing on the huge Peenemünde site. The Soviets destroyed everything else after the war.
Just like that, we're in.
They do have one important clue about the rocket program. The Nazis filmed many hours of their rocket tests. But where did those tests take place? Where were the rockets designed and built?
place is huge.
To unlock those secrets, Pete and Marty must first peel back the present and reveal Peenemünde as it was 80 years ago. They've teamed up with a group of German researchers from the University of Osnabrück. Together, they've set up a makeshift HQ in the old power station. For the first time ever, they'll use LiDAR data gathered by the German government to create a virtual landscape in 3D. This amazing LiDAR technology uses lasers mounted on aircraft to strip away all the trees and ground cover. The results are astounding. LiDAR reveals the sheer scale of Peenemünde, a complex occupying 10 square miles. A vast array of buildings beyond the power station. Hundreds of miles of roads, railway lines, and piping crisscross the island. Hitler's secret site is exposed. But how did this place work? There's not much to go on. Many vital documents were lost or destroyed. With the model at their fingertips, one feature immediately stands out. A mysterious elliptical shape set apart from the rest of the site.
So this feature, whatever it is, has clearly been heavily bombed, but what is that?
Can we maybe zoom in on that, Andreas?
It's well connected by road and rail and occupies some 300,000 square feet. It's clearly important, but what was it for? Using LiDAR as a map, Marty treks 2.5 miles north and east from the power station to check it out. On the ground, it's clear that the donut is a great bank of earth, a berm. And in the center, Marty recognizes something important that they didn't pick up in the LiDAR. He's found a key that may unlock the geography of the site.
This fire hydrant was made in Magdeburg, and it shows up in much of the motion picture film footage and the still photographs taken of tests that were conducted.
Marty has spotted a hydrant just like this one in the Nazi test footage. It crops up again and again in shots of the test site.
The weapon was mounted on a launch platform, protected by the arena berm, so that personnel were protected on the outside in the event that something went wrong. And oh my God, when things went wrong dramatically. It was spectacular, the failures that occurred.
The hydrant was essential for firefighting. Explosions and fireballs were everyday hazards. And there's a huge concrete pit here. This is also clearly visible in the Nazi footage.
Oh, wow. So this is for test stand 7.
Test Stand 7. It's the launch pad where prototype V2s were tested. It was the beating heart of the V2 rocket program.
So in a way, this is the Nazi Cape Canaveral.
LiDAR has torn the lid off this site and brought Marty to Test Stand 7. It's revealed the footprints of storerooms, observation bunkers, and even the tracks used to move the rockets into place. The scale of this top-secret facility, the massive earthworks, and the enormous concrete test pit are clear evidence of manpower and money invested here. Pete and Marty are itching to know more. The rockets were tested here, but where were they built? On October 3rd, 1942, a V-2 rocket became the first man-made object to reach the edge of space. But it would take the Nazis 2 more years to weaponize it. Tech wizard Pete Kelsey
I'm headed this way.
and historian Marty Morgan
All right, later.
are trying to work out how and where they built their deadly V-2 rockets. Hitler threw resources into the project. The Peenemünde V-2 facility cost the Third Reich around $10 billion in today's money. The Führer was determined to smash London at any price. He planned to rain down rockets on Britain's capital city, and he was demanding production of 3,000 a month. Launching a prototype was a brief triumph. But how could they build enough to satisfy Hitler? There must be a factory somewhere under this vast forest. But where?
I've been curious about this spot right here that looks a lot like a building footprint, but it's so big.
LiDAR reveals what might be the foundations of a building, occupying an area 815 feet by 390 feet, bigger than 5 American football fields. Maybe they're onto something. It's a shadow on the LiDAR. Marty needs boots on the ground to check it out. He's joined by Dr. Constanze Röhrl.
Right now we are entering the building.
Even standing among the debris, it's hard to imagine how it once looked and what went on here.
To look at the rubble that's left of it today, you don't really get much of a sense of the impressive structure that once was here. So that must make your job quite difficult.
It does, indeed. So that's actually one of the questions that we are dealing with. How did the building function?
Some of the mysteries surrounding this place may never be solved. Most of the top-secret plans were lost or destroyed in the chaos after the war. But Constanze has unearthed one architect's drawing of this building, dating from 1942. The Nazis called this Hall F1, and the plan clearly shows a factory designed to manufacture rockets. But it's only a plan.
With the plans and the drawings, we can't be sure if they actually show the final state of the building.
But when the team combined the 1942 draft plan with the modern LiDAR data, everything fits. The old plan, the evidence on the ground, and the LiDAR all match perfectly. For the first time since this site was destroyed, 3D imagery can reveal far more than just a footprint. This is the building designed to mass-produce Hitler's killer rocket. It's clear that every part was made on site, feeding into production lines. For part of the assembly, rockets were upright, so the building had to be tall. A ramp with 2 huge cranes linked the factory to the railway, delivering the rockets for deployment. The factory floor, covering 320,000 square feet, was supported by 2 lines of monumental concrete blocks.
My God, this thing is massive.
These concrete blocks were built to withstand aerial bombardment. Pete and Marty are starting to build a picture of the Peenemünde rocket site. They've located the test stand north and east of the power station and Hall F1, 2.5 miles south down the coast. But Hall F1 never went into full production. Why? Something shook this facility to its foundations and jeopardized the whole V2 rocket program. On the night of August 17, 1943, Churchill ordered one of the largest bombing raids the world had ever seen. 596 Royal Air Force bombers filled the skies over Peenemünde. Their mission? To destroy the secret rocket program. RAF records show they dropped almost 2,000 tons of munitions in 45 minutes. Polish intelligence sources had pinpointed the secret installation in the spring of 1943. For the first time, Pete and the team have combined RAF reconnaissance photos taken after the raid with their LiDAR images. And a startling truth emerges.
Well, now we can obviously see that this whole place was bombed in this mission. But what we can see also is that F1 wasn't destroyed, this
Right.
bomb raid.
Right, it's still standing.
Yeah, exactly.
Hall F1 was the most important structure on the site, where these deadly rockets were about to go into full production. Yet the thousands of tons of explosives mostly landed elsewhere. The reinforced factory, Hall F1, remained intact. Why? Pete probes the LiDAR to see where those thousands of bombs did their damage.
I want to move into the area here where the number of bomb craters just jumps out of the LiDAR.
Overlaying RAF reconnaissance images onto 21st century LiDAR scans, Pete has pinpointed the site of a whole village just south of Hall F1, now obliterated.
So this is the area where the scientists and their families lived. So you can see the large amount of bomb craters that is still to be seen in this area nowadays.
Hundreds of Germany's top scientists worked on V2. So the Nazis built a luxurious housing complex at Karlshagen.
I imagine life here to have been something very, very comfortable, almost with a holiday flair. I mean, you have your little house close to the beach, so probably quite idyllic.
LiDAR shows that Karlshagen took a brutal pounding. The bombing raid was codenamed Operation Hydra. The objective was to cut off the head of the monster, the brains behind the V2 weapons project. Launch pads and factories could be rebuilt, but scientists and technicians were irreplaceable. Killing them would stop the rocket program in its tracks. The RAF bombed at night to catch the scientists asleep in their beds. But they were still toiling to meet Hitler's spiraling demands.
As you can see on this LiDAR data, the research area where the scientists have been working late that night wasn't bombed as much as the habitations. So this means people working there that night had better chances to survive.
But they survived. but wives and children did not, you know. They probably wished they were dead.
178 people were killed. The Peenemünde site was compromised. The Allies had found it and could attack again at will. A $10 billion facility that had been running for 6 years had to be abandoned. Germany's war was going badly. By 1943, the Red Army was advancing from the east, and the Allied forces were landing in Italy. But Hitler remained convinced that with V-2 rockets, he could snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But only if he could find another secret location and build the whole thing again. Marty and Pete now know that the V-2 rockets pounding London weren't made on this site. They're heading off to find Hitler's fallback position. Pete and Marty are investigating one of the Nazis' darkest secrets. Marty has found astonishing photographs taken by Hitler's personal photographer, Walter Frenz. He was ordered to document the V-2 weapons project, and he made it look like the set of a James Bond movie. The photos were taken in central Germany, a place called Mittelbau-Dora. So why this place? And how did the Germans hide the vital factory? On the surface, there's not much to see today. Pete and Marty pore over LiDAR scans released by the German government. They're working again with the specialist survey team from Osnabrück.
Airborne LiDAR, just like from Peenemünde.
Yeah, exactly. But this time it shows Mittelbau-Dora and how it looks today.
So are these railway lines I'm seeing right here?
Yeah, exactly. They come in from the north, just right around this corner, and then they disappear.
A network of railways and footprints of buildings are scattered here. But there's nothing to match Hall F1 or Frenz's movie set images. There had been an old gypsum mine here. The train lines disappear into the mountain. It looks like Hitler built his rocket factory under the Konstein mountain. They built a subterranean production line.
They tried to camouflage the whole place in order to not be seen by aerial reconnaissance, for example.
Right, and also, what better place to be safe from aerial bombardment than under a mountain?
Exactly.
Pete and Marty want to get inside to understand the scale of what the Nazis did here.
Well, that's a tunnel entrance.
Yeah, that's how we're getting in. There's no doubt about it.
How did it work? How was it built? What actually went on in here?
Oh my God, look at this.
After the war, the Soviets demolished most of the tunnel system, determined to put it beyond use. Less than a tenth of these tunnels can still be explored. Marty and Pete are trying to recover a lost factory buried 72 years ago by people who didn't want it found.
This place is enormous. I spent a lifetime studying about the V-2 rocket. And I was prepared for Dora Mittelbau, but I wasn't prepared for how big the tunnel really is.
The entire production line is long gone. commandeered by Allied forces when they overran the site. But there's still a mine of information down here.
Oh, God. There's still V2 parts here. Look at this. Those appear to be all gyroscopes. God. Oh my God, look at this. That's part of a V2 fuel tank.
The few remaining tunnels have never been scanned. Now, for the first time, Pete's got permission to use 21st century tech to plot this vast interior.
This is a perfect spot for the laser scanner because this has very long range. And then because there is so much space in here and it's such a complex sort of labyrinth of tunnels, I've also got the mobile scanner, this handheld that I can actually walk with.
Pete methodically works through the accessible tunnels using laser tools to build high-definition 3D images. He's creating a template to envision the huge area now beyond reach. Soviet engineers mapped the tunnel network before they sealed it off with dynamite. Pete combines their map with his scans to get a realistic picture of the whole intricate web as it was in 1945. Connecting the 2 mile-long shafts, like the rungs of a ladder, are 46 additional tunnels, each 600 feet long. The Nazis constructed a vast factory inside a mountain and got it up and running in a matter of months. How they managed to do it will take Pete and Marty into one of the darkest chapters in the Nazi story.
Right after Operation Hydra, within 10 days of Hydra, in fact, in August of '43, thousands of concentration camp inmates are sent here to convert this space into a factory.
The Nazis had used slaves at Peenemünde, but at Mittelbau Dora, it was done on a different scale entirely. Contemporary records show that they took them from concentration camps across Europe. They put tens of thousands to work here.
And the conditions that they live in when they get here early on are hellish. They keep them in the tunnels. They are sleeping in these connecting galleries. In fact, there's some people that stay here, they're 6 months without seeing the light of day outside.
Survivor accounts tell how the victims were worked to death in these tunnels, on a starvation diet with poor sanitation. Pneumonia, tuberculosis, typhoid, and dysentery were everyday killers. SS records detail almost 3,000 prisoner deaths in the first 6 months. Suddenly, the mechanics of the factory seem less important. Marty and Pete will try to find out more about the people who worked and died here. In 1944, the V2 rocket factory was making 20 rockets a day. Crowding would impede production, so the slaves had to be moved out. So what did the SS do with them? LiDAR scans of Mittelbau Dora show the valley is littered with the footprints of buildings. Pete thinks they may be part of the answer.
This is such a great example of where the LiDAR is so useful without this LiDAR, it would be all but impossible to understand that there are many, many buildings and signs of earthwork going all the way up this hill.
Pete's noticed a sewage system linking the buildings. So these were probably dwellings.
Wow, look at that. 111. So no doubt this is Barrack 111. What's interesting, the LiDAR brought us here because of this concrete slab. So we really wanted to come up here, and we are way off in the woods. We're way up on the top of this slope. And boy, I'm glad we came up here.
Pete's identified a concentration camp right alongside the rocket factory.
We have a report from December 43 telling that there were about 20 barracks already finished. So the last inmate moved out of the tunnel around April 44.
SS records show that prisoners were categorized according to their usefulness.
The SS decides to separate the production and the construction site prisoners and separate the unfit and sick prisoners from that part.
Semi-skilled prisoners, those actually building the V2, live in the buildings on the valley floor. Unskilled laborers live further up the hill. The injured and the sick, unfit for work, live at the top of the hill, beside the crematorium.
And this place pretty much turned into a death zone because the SS let them die because they were not of any value anymore.
As they died, more prisoners were drafted in. At least 20,000 died at Mittelbau-Dora camp. They disposed of the corpses as they did at Auschwitz and elsewhere. They incinerated them like garbage.
This is the camp's permanent crematorium. And it's the only original building still standing at Mittelbau-Dora today.
The crematorium was quite literally the end of the road for many of Mittelbau-Dora's slaves.
Well, if there's a symbol of the Nazi regime, it's got to be this: disposal, final solution. Wow, it's a little overwhelming. So forgive me, but I got to get out of here.
In April 1945, Mittelbau-Dora was liberated by the 3rd Armored Division of the U.S. Army. In 15 months, Mittelbau-Dora produced over 6,000 V2 rockets. By the blood and sweat of 60,000 slaves. An important question remains. If Churchill hadn't delayed production by bombing Peenemünde, could the V2 have changed the outcome of World War II? Pete and Marty want to know just how lethal were V2 rockets? March 8th, 1945. A German base in the Netherlands has launched a V-2 rocket and hit Smithfield Market in London to devastating effect. The same battery fires a second of these ballistic missiles. It's also aimed at London, but it misses. Marty and Pete are following up an extraordinary lead on that stray rocket. Only one V-2 has ever been archaeologically excavated. Not much was recovered. This time, German and British scientists are working together using magnetometry. It's a highly sensitive technology that maps variations in the Earth's magnetic field.
Andreas, what do you think that shows us might be down there?
We can't say what this really is. It can be soil or sediment layer that was very, very high temperatures.
They found something strange about the geology, as though a small meteor has crashed here.
Which would be consistent with an impact of a rocket with a warhead.
Andreas's readings suggest that tremendous heat may have affected the geology. It tallies with a 2,000-pound warhead detonation. The British scientists, Colin and Sean Welch, think there's solid evidence down there.
So the Germans think that there's a thermal anomaly,
Right.
which I admittedly do not know what that means.
It has to do with that much mass going that fast, hitting this kind of geology. There's going to be a lot of heat generated. What's interesting about that is obviously it points to a high velocity impact.
And there's another clue. A 1946 aerial photograph shows a mysterious hole in the ground. Even if there's a V-2 down there, is there anything left after detonation? It's time to call in the digger.
This is exciting. The digger is scraping away the uppermost layer of topsoil. Once he's done that, we're going to see what's in this crater.
The outline of the impact is plainly visible. Only a few feet down, the digger makes its first find.
Oh, brother. So, gentlemen, what have you found?
20th century archaeology? Well, the magnetometer didn't tell a lie.
No?
There's plenty of metal here.
What the scan found is a post-war automobile, an old Morris Oxford. But the team aren't put off by this false dawn, and their efforts are soon rewarded.
This part is a small fragment of the rocket that's been blasted into the wall of the crater.
This is a very encouraging discovery because underneath the car, we found this piece of V-2 rocket outer skin. This proves that there's more V-2 just beneath the surface. There's more waiting to be found.
As the crater wall is scraped away, many more fragments of V-2 come to light.
I mean, we can barely keep up with the amount coming out now.
And they're finding identifiable parts.
Oh, that's heavy.
Yes, I'm thinking perhaps
That is combustion chamber. Combustion chamber, yeah. Yeah.
The V-2's combustion chamber was the rocket motor's heart, where the fuel was burnt.
Oh my God, this thing weighs a ton.
that's a burner cup. There are another 17 of these here somewhere.
Oh.
So there were 18 of these on top of the combustion chamber, pushing the alcohol through these jets.
This is hard evidence of what happened on impact.
The combustion chamber was very, very strong. It had to be to withstand the temperature, the force of the thrust as it was launched. That thing smashed into pieces. So it gives you a very clear idea about the massive explosion at the time of impact.
But the massive explosion has left a surprisingly small crater, especially for a 2,000-pound warhead. An extraordinary truth is emerging. Hitler's Vengeance rocket may have been flawed.
The missile was coming down perhaps 3.5 times the speed of sound, which means it's puncturing the ground faster than the detonation.
Smithfield Market had a peculiar vulnerability because it was built over underground tunnels. When the V2 slammed into the ground at over 3,000 miles an hour, it penetrated those tunnels and exploded below. The market collapsed into the void, so the V2 worked like a bunker buster. But on other targets, it would be much less damaging. The warhead only exploded several feet below ground, where much of its force was wasted. And this spot reveals another big flaw that Hitler's rocket scientists never overcame.
The V2 was very, very inaccurate. So, I mean, the very fact that we're stood here in a field in Kent, you know, it hasn't got to London.
The Welch brothers have catalogued 1,119 V2s launched against London. Less than half hit the city. The Nazis' fixation with the flawed V2 cost the regime a fortune. Each missile cost 100,000 Reichmarks to make, around $150,000 in today's money. It was a hugely expensive way to deliver explosives. A single Lancaster bomber could carry 7 times more firepower and could fly many sorties. Not to mention the human cost.
It's become clear to me, anyway, that far more people lost their lives creating the thing than lost their lives being a target of the thing.
Yeah.
For every person killed by a V2, 3 died in Mittelbau-Dora. Hitler's conviction that his Vengeance rockets would win the war for Germany was a huge miscalculation.
Maybe it's a good thing that Nazi Germany made the poor decision of investing in the V2 program. That's a hard sell. It's hard to sell that to the victims. But it certainly is, I think, a better ending for the Allied side, that all of those resources went into making this thing, which was a big fizzle and disappointment, rather than making more tanks or more fighters.
Marty and Pete have explored Hitler's V2 rocket program. Scientific advances may yet reveal more, but one thing is clear. Hitler's obsession with this ultimate weapon was a significant part of his undoing.